Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Tradition Kitchens class with Third Culture Cooks.
It is talking.
Hi,
It is.
welcome.
It was first read in 2012
Please note
as
that we are recording and that you are not
as a
muted.
one-off.
So, Valerie
Innovation
Larson,
sent through.
we can hear you.
Okay.
I'm going to try to mute you. Folks, please mute yourself, but keep your cameras on so we can meet all of you. Welcome on behalf of Tradition Kitchens. I'm Julia, so excited to have you here for our class. It might be morning for some, evening for others, afternoon, depending on where you are. In the chat, we would love to know where you are calling in from. Tell us in the chat, share your location. I'm talking to all of you from Atlanta, Georgia. So excited to have 38 folks on the line. We're expecting over 100 today. For those of you who are newer to our classes, just want to encourage you to please mute. I don't know why we're getting so many folks off mute, but it just helps us make sure we can hear everyone and our teacher and learn together. So looks like we have some people introducing themselves. So I want to welcome Avanti from Toronto, Margaret from Boston, Susie from Hawaii, welcome back, Natasha also in Boston, Kim from Denver. Those of you who've been here before know that we love doing the kitchen cam where we get to meet folks from all across the world. So if you are on video, I'm going to take a quick look on gallery view, see who is here with us for quick intros. Want to encourage you, our being on video creates a sense of community in our classes and connection as if we're neighbors cooking in each other's kitchen. So Ruth, thanks for being on video. I'm gonna spotlight you and ask you to just say hello. Tell us where you're calling in from.
For being constipated, Restore Life works with the water in your body to get back your natural rhythm. Relax.
We've got
okay, I'm from Pickering, Ontario in Canada.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Are you cooking along or just watching today?
No, just watching. Just watching.
That is.
I've really enjoyed the Zoom calls.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate you being part of this community. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Great to see Ruth, and so many other folks are introducing themselves from Nashville. Danny, thanks for letting me know that it's unmuted. I had the setting that it should have muted all of you, so I'll look into that behind the scenes, but appreciate everybody pressing mute. We've got Louise from Minnesota. I am looking at a screen of minimal video. So I just want to make a quick plug to invite people to join us on video so we can get to see each other and meet one another. Margaret, hello, great to see you. Thanks for turning on your video. I'm going to spotlight Parul and invite her, a former teacher, to introduce herself. If you want to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, it's nice to meet everyone. I'm Carl. Julia and I go back pretty far. So we've been friends since we were kids. And yeah, I've taught samosas and aloo bondas before. So I'm excited to learn the new class. So
yay, thank you for being here. It's so fun. Tradition Kitchens allows me to reconnect with wonderful friends who I have from the past, but also the chance to meet new people. So many of you are joining us and have come over the last 2 years. And let us know in the chat where you are calling in from. So I see Michael from Portland. Midori is back from Japan. It's great to see you. Can we spotlight you and have you say hello to everyone?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Where are you calling in from in Japan?
Yes, I live in Kyoto in Japan.
And what time is it there?
In the Saturday morning, 9:36.
Great. Nothing like starting Saturday morning with some amazing Indian food. Thank you for being here. Great to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for join me.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, we're almost getting ready to start. We have 44 folks on the line, so welcome. Keep up the introductions in the chat. It's great to see where everyone is calling in from and around the world. I want to invite you to participate in our Tradition Kitchen Selfie. It's our Zoom selfie. So if you can hit that video on button for us, and I'll call out a few names. I see Al, Renee, Radiance, Romy, Cheryl, Arlene, Christine, Deb, Danny. Just come and join us on video for a couple seconds at least, and hopefully you'll stay on video, but it'd be great to capture some faces in our selfie. So I'll give everyone a minute or so to turn on their video. Looks like we have as many people as possible on video. All right, I'm going to count us down. So look at your cameras and awesome. Yay, Radiance, great to see you. Avanti, Catherine. All right, 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. And one more in case anybody closed their eyes. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you so much. Keep those cameras on. It's always really nice for our teacher and our community to see all of you who are joining us. So welcome on behalf of Tradition Kitchens. I'm Julia. My mom and I started this fun volunteer-based organization a little over 2 years ago as a way to create community and learn about people's stories through food and culture. And we have had so many wonderful classes and teachers over our time virtually. So I want to officially kick us off by just giving you a little bit of info. We have our chat. If you haven't introduced yourself, please let us know where you're calling in from. We have people from around the world, which is so exciting. We also want to encourage you to make sure you're muted. And if you have questions, you can unmute or raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on that, or use the chat. If anyone on the call might know the answer to something, we encourage you to share your culinary knowledge so that we can all help each other out along the way. Is anyone cooking along with us tonight? We know we have some people who are just watching and learning. Any chefs with us so we can just keep track of you? I see Kim's camera is in her kitchen, so maybe she'll let us know. If you are you cooking with us? Yes, got the thumbs up. Okay, great. Anyone else who might be cooking along with us, please do let us know so we can make sure we are connecting with you. I'm just gonna mute anyone who might be off muting. So give me one quick second. Sorry on the back end here. All right. So with that, I'm just so excited to introduce our teacher today, who I met through Instagram. Ragini of Third Culture Cooks is calling in from India. It's about 6 a.m. there, so we're so grateful. I'll try to tone down my excitement. So I know it's early for you, but thank you for teaching today. We're excited to learn about you, your food stories, the amazing work you lead, and your mission-driven approach to cooking. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and excited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
yeah.
Great.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ragini. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super, super excited to be doing this. It's really exciting to teach a class with folks from everywhere who are just interested in this, and I love this idea. So thanks for joining me. Like Julia said, it's 6 a.m. where I am. So if I miss something, it's probably because I just haven't woken up entirely yet, but I did try. Yeah, I run Third Culture Cooks. And actually what I'm going to do is, given that we have an hour, I'm going to get us started, and then I'm going to come back and do an intro to Third Culture Cooks and kind of what I do around that. And I see a few known folks. So hi, Avanti. Nice, thanks for being here. And yeah, super excited to cook with all of you, and let's get started. So what I'll do really quickly is we'll get the dough going for the parathas. And after we do that, I'll do a quick intro and just a quick look around the other ingredients for the mutton curry as well. So the first thing, if you are cooking along, if you could just mix together the 1 cup of whole wheat flour and 1 cup of all-purpose flour for the dough. So if you can just go ahead and get those in a mixing bowl together, and just hopefully you have them ready, and just give them a good mix, make sure everything's sort of integrated. And to that, you're going to go ahead and add some salt. So really to your taste. I've got some pink salt, which tends to run saltier than white salt. So I'm doing about 1/3 of a spoon. If you're using white salt, maybe start with about 1/2 a spoon and go from there. You want them to have a little bit of salt, but you don't want the parathas to have too much flavor, or sorry, the dough to have too much salt of its own, because obviously it will be paired with the kadhi, which is going to have its own flavor. So give that a good mix. Get that all nicely integrated. It's a super simple dough. We just need it to rest for about 30 minutes before we actually work with it. So I just want to get that out of the way before we start. Awesome. And then we have our 1/3 of a cup of ghee. So if you have melted butter instead, that's okay. Ghee, obviously, as most of you know, is really traditional to this part of the world, both the sort of the Indian subcontinent, the Asian subcontinent, as well as the Arab world, and so that's what we use most often. It just has a much deeper flavor than butter, but it also, the other benefit of cooking with it is that it has a really, really high smoking point, and so you can pump a lot of heat into ghee and do all kinds of things with it without it burning. So that's the other sort of benefit of it. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 1/3 a cup of ghee into my dough. And it's not going to be quite enough to make a crumble with the fat. So just give it a little mix and let the ghee integrate, but you will still have lots of flour that doesn't have any fat sort of attached to it. So I don't know if that's clear. Actually, I'm just going to pick this up. There we go. Hopefully you guys can see that.
That looks
And
awesome.
then awesome.
I'm just going to
And
quickly
then
make a note. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's muted on the back end, but Belinda, I can't mute you and we hear you. So if you could please mute, that would be really appreciated. Otherwise, I'm going to have to put you in the waiting room. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. And then we're going to start adding water to actually bring our dough together. So if you wanted to use like a KitchenAid or something, then you can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, this is actually a very, very simple dough. We just need to bring it to the point of sort of coming together, and then a couple of kneads, not too much. So it's quite easy to do by hand as well. The one thing I will recommend, I've just got some water here. The one thing I will recommend is that you warm up the water to sort of just over lukewarm. So you don't want anything that's like difficult to touch, but at the same time, you definitely don't want cold water, because we're not trying to create like a short pastry. We're very much trying to create like a malleable, flexible sort of dough. So you definitely want sort of warm water to help bring the dough together. And especially if you're in a cooler climate, then even more so. If you're in a warmer, more humid climate, then you might get away with room temperature water as well. So if you're not confident to just pour and sort of eyeball it, I would suggest using the 1/3 cup measure and just start with adding in 1/3 of a cup. Give that a mix and see how you're going. I will definitely need more water than this. So that's disappeared fairly quickly for me. I'm going to go ahead and add some more water. And then I'm just going to knead this by hand before I show you guys what the dough looks like. All right.
Looks like we have a quick question from Natasha. If you don't have enough time to make dough, any recommendations?
So, I mean, this dough is honestly really forgiving. It doesn't need to rise. There's no real sort of, long technique attached to it. So what I would suggest is, if say you have 15 minutes to get the dough together, and no more than that, I'd say 10 minutes is kind of like, you definitely want to rest your dough for 10 minutes and not work with it before that. But say we take 15 minutes, what I would do is just heat your oven to, I think in metric. And so just heat your oven to about like 85 to 90 degrees centigrade. And maybe someone can quickly look up what that is in Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, I don't think in Fahrenheit. But heat your oven up to sort of like a very, very low setting, and then just cover the dough and pop it into the oven just to give it that sort of inject it with a bit of heat instead of giving time. But to be honest, it, like I said, super forgiving dough. So 10 minutes, it's got quite a bit of fat in it. It's got, thank you. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah, and just for folks who are watching the recording, that's 185 Fahrenheit.
So as you can see, I've been kneading for no more than a minute by the clock, and this dough has come together just like this, right? So we have this dough, it's like pretty malleable and it's very soft. It's all staying together in a ball. And this hand's dirty because I was kneading with it, but you can see that it's actually, the dough itself is non-sticky. Yeah. And so I'll just give it a couple of final little punches and bring it into a ball, just like so, just like this. Actually, I think the camera lets you clear further away, just like this. And I'm going to cover it with a kitchen towel and set it aside. All right. Any questions on the dough before I move on to the next step? Any other questions on the dough?
Nope, not at this time, but keep your questions
No?
coming in the chat.
Awesome. So like Julia said, I'm Ragini and I run Third Culture Cooks, and I do a number of different things, but essentially I try and answer the question, why do we eat the way that we do? So the reason what I do is called Third Culture Cooks is because I'm someone who's sort of lived and grown up in all these different places in the world, and have always sort of observed that we're actually quite similar. And not only are we similar, but our food tells a very, very specific story. And you can kind of trace history through looking at the ingredients, in someone's food, whether it's trade or whatever it is. I see a couple of questions coming in on the dough. Should I take those real quick?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah. So I think one was, how long do we let the dough rest? Was that right? Is that one of the questions? So sorry, they're disappearing as I see them come in. So you can let the dough rest sort of up to about 30 minutes. You really don't need more than that. But anywhere between 15 and 30 is plenty. So that's how long. And what was the second question? Sorry, I read it. But
Yes, was it whole wheat flour, plain or self-rising?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's two types of flour. It's 1 cup of whole wheat and 1 cup of all-purpose flour. So for this particular one, you just mix them. And the reason we do that, so many of you will know sort of the South Asian rotis or parathas are often made with only whole wheat flour, whereas a naan is often made with, say, all-purpose flour, or a kulcha or a bhatura, or these sorts of breads. But for this one in particular, the reason that we do both is because you want a little bit of the earthiness of the whole wheat flour. So you want sort of that flavor, but you also want the flexibility that all-purpose flour gives you. All-purpose flour just allows the dough to stretch thinner because there's more gluten in it. So it just allows the dough to sort of stretch thinner and allows us to laminate more, which gives us more layers. So it just kind of works better. If you think of like a Kerala paratha, if you're familiar with that, or a Kerala paratha, if you're familiar with that, or a Malaysian roti, or a Caribbean roti, they're all made with like all-purpose flour and they're super flaky. So we're sort of in between. In terms of water, I see the question come in. It's a little bit difficult to answer that question because dough everywhere responds really differently to water. So I use just over 2/3 of a cup here in a reasonably cool climate, but it will depend on where you are. What I would suggest is keep your water, as I said, above room temperature, about sort of between 24 and 27 degrees centigrade is ideal. But I mean, it doesn't have to be particularly exact, just warm is fine. Shouldn't be hot to the touch. You should be able to hold your hand in it very, very comfortably. It just shouldn't be lukewarm or cool to touch. And once you have that temperature of water, just add it in small increments and, work the dough till it comes together. Here's the great thing. If you overdo the water a little bit and you feel like, this is a bit stickier than I want. And when we open up the dough again, I'll show you the texture of the dough so you know what you're looking for. But basically you're looking for a non-sticky dough that holds together well in a ball and that feels quite soft to touch. It's not a stiff dough, this one. Yeah, and because we're using all-purpose flour, it becomes soft pretty quickly as well. Cool, so I'll keep talking about myself here and there, but let's move on to the mutton curry. So many of you would have seen the spelling of this and thought, oh, is this, what is the spelling? And the spelling is Kadhi, and it's not a mutton curry. I mean, it is, when we finish it, it will look like a curry. But this particular preparation of yogurt and gram flour together It's a very specific preparation, and several communities across South Asia have their version of a kadhi. And so it's one of those like weird sounds that's really difficult. It's like a DH together, and it doesn't quite translate into English, but if you see KADHI, it's typically referring to this gravy made with yogurt and gram flour. And so my family is from Punjab, and typically Punjabi kadhi, which incidentally I have some of in the fridge, but typically Punjabi kadhi is made with just the yogurt and the gram flour and a few spices, very similar to what we're using today, but not exactly the same. And then you put pakoras into it. So you make like onion pakoras, and then, you know, that goes in, and then that becomes like the bulk of the gravy, you know, the bulk that in the gravy that you have with rice. This one is actually a family recipe. And the reason that this class is kind of special for me is because I teach a lot, but I actually very rarely teach my own family recipes. And those of you who have been to my classes before will know this, because I very often am talking about history, and so my recipe development is sort of led by my research. And so this is really, really special for me, because this is one of the first times I'm teaching a dish that, or one of the first times, yeah, I'm teaching a dish that is like a family dish that we absolutely love. But this dish isn't from Punjab, where my family from. This dish is actually from a state called Rajasthan, which is in the west. It's a desert state, and they use gram flour a lot in the desert. And the reason they use it a lot is because not a lot of stuff grows in the desert. And so what does grow, they use it in a variety of ways. And one of those things is chana, or the small, it's actually not, so gram flour is actually not chickpea flour, that's different. Gram flour is great question. So gram flour is the flour from the small, if you've ever seen the small black chickpeas, the ones that are there, if you go to an Indian grocery store, they're called kala chana, which literally translates to black chana. And so it's a smaller chickpea, it's harder, it doesn't absorb as much water, it holds its shape a lot more. You can roast it and have it as a snack, which is really common as well, the same way you would do with peanuts. And so gram flour is the flour of that. You could probably buy it at any depending on where you are. If you're in like a major city, then most big grocery stores now carry it. A lot of health stores now carry it as well. But if you have an Indian grocery store anywhere in your vicinity, then they will most definitely have it. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the ingredients real quick. So we have our onions. My onions here are pretty small, but I did put quartered on the ingredient list because I know the North American onions tend to run a little bit larger. So just have those quartered or halved, about 350 grams of onions. We need 8 to 10 cloves of garlic. Hopefully those are peeled and ready to go. We need 3 or 4 green chilies that have just been slit down the center. Hopefully you can see that, just slit down the center. So we don't need to chop that. And that's so that they impart their flavor without, coming in a bite when you're actually going to eat. So just have them slit and that's fine. As far as the spices go for our kadhi, we have red chili powder. We have some hing or Asafoetida, which is a spice that's fairly unique to this part of the world and has a very, very pungent and distinct smell. And for the variety of chili, I haven't specified it on the recipe here because it's really what is comfortable for you. So here I have Kashmiri chili, but the other one that I actually love to use in Indian cooking is this one from, you guys see that? This one from Burl Up and Barrel. It's their Cobanero chili, which is from Guatemala. And I just find this has an incredible smoky flavor. The chilies that I wouldn't use for this, so I would say like you can pretty much use any chili. The only red chili that I might not use for this is Aleppo chili because it doesn't quite have the kick that we need in this dish to kind of round it out. And then the other one would be sort of the Thai bird's eye chili because it's very strong, so I wouldn't use that. But other than that, you can feel free. You can use paprika if you like the flavor, that's kind of smokier flavor, go ahead and use that. I'm using a Kashmiri red chili powder. Yeah, absolutely. Or this like habanero chili powder, which I love. So you can use sort of anything you like. So chili, hing, and then we have turmeric, which obviously goes into most foods from the subcontinent. We usually just throw in a bit of turmeric for good measure. So there's that. And then we have cumin, which is actually, so fun fact, the most cumin Yes, that was Cabanero with a C, that's right. So the most cumin in the world grows in the part of India that this recipe is from. So in Rajasthan, in the western part of India, this is somewhere that we have the most cumin. Is Asafoetida essential to this dish? That's a great question. So nothing is sort of, you know, absolutely essential. It'll just change the flavor of the dish. But what Asafoetida does is it kind of bulks out the garlic flavor, and gives a certain sharpness to the flavor of the dish, right? So the dish is it's yogurt, it's gram flour, it's quite mild on the tongue, and then it's the Asafoetida, and depending on how much chili you put the chili, that gives that slight sharpness to the flavor. So it's really to your liking. So those are our spices. Then obviously we have our gram flour, we have our yogurt, we have the ghee, and of course the meat. So I've suggested the use of mutton. That's kind of what we use traditionally. Mutton is one of the more traditional meats eaten in North India, at least. Really interesting story with the chicken and how it came in, but if we have time for that, I'll get in. But mutton is kind of the most widely eaten meat. And especially, again, in the part of the subcontinent that we're looking at, the sort of western desert side of it, you have lots of wild goats that roam free and so on. And so mutton is definitely traditional for this dish. That being said, beef works really well. Chicken doesn't work quite as well in this because it doesn't add a ton of depth to this particular style of gravy. So for meats, I would either do mutton or beef. If you wanted a vegetarian option, again, I put potatoes in there. Potatoes are great. They just, and if you can get like a lump of potato or something that just soaks up a ton of flavor, that's perfect. A potato that's a little, that sort of doesn't, you want a potato that, soaks up enough curry that when you take a bite of it, there's flavor right through the potato. That's kind of the ideal. No, not so much wild goats running free. I was just sort of saying traditionally the goat is it's just a much more common animal to find in that part of the country, which is why it's traditionally made with mutton. So yes, if you wanted a vegetarian version, potato is a great option. Another great option is a portobello mushroom, and another great option if you can get tinned jackfruit, you drain that out, and that takes really well to these sorts of curries as well. And if you're someone who's looking to replace meat, then jackfruit is often texturally something that people quite enjoy. Okay, so I'm going to get started cooking. Hopefully those of you who are cooking along are ready to go as well. Just a quick check on the time. Okay, so hopefully you have your tawa or griddle for the flatbread. We're actually going to start by turning that on first. We're not doing the breads, don't worry. We just need this. No oil, no butter, nothing. Just go ahead and turn this on a reasonably high flame, and take your quartered onions or your halved onions, depending on the size, and just put them face down onto the pan. And the reason we're doing this is we're sort of trying to build some flavor in the onion. So go ahead and put that face down, and we'll just leave that there for a few minutes. While that's on there, if you could grab your gram flour, so I had 2 tablespoons of gram flour and 1 cup of regular unflavored yogurt. So just regular full fat unflavored yogurt, and go ahead and toss that in. And then we're going to use a spoon or a whisk or a spatula, whatever you have, just to bring these together. And what you really want to do is get all of the lumps out of the gram flour, because with gram flour, it can get pretty lumpy when you put it into liquid. And so before it goes into the liquid, we want to make sure that it's sort of a smooth paste. So giving it a bit of a mix with the spatula, and I'm going to go in with the whisk. Let's give it a good whisk. I wouldn't suggest Greek yogurt because it doesn't have enough liquid. So I wouldn't personally suggest Greek yogurt. I would just suggest regular set yogurt. That being said, if what you have on hand is Greek yogurt, that's fine too. You might just have to add, I would say, probably a little bit of milk, better than water. But if you don't have milk, then water is fine too. Okay, so you can see it takes like a little bit of whisking to get quite all the lumps out, but this is what we this is what we end up with, is this like, you guys see that okay? Yeah, it's like a thick paste, and that's ready now for us to use in our cooking. You should be able to smell your onion at this point. If you've got, you can see I've got the heat quite high on my end, but you should be able to start getting that sweet onion smell that you get when onions like on the grill, because the underside of this would have started sort of, you know, charring hopefully by now. So we'll give that another second or so, or another minute or so. And while that's happening, if you could just grab your blender attachment, and into your blender attachment, just throw in your cloves of garlic and a little bit of water. So I'm going to put about a quarter cup of water just to give it some liquid to move around. So get that water in, and let's see how our onions are doing. The other thing that has to go in here is the onions, so we'll just wait for this guy to, okay, so you can see I'm starting to get a bit of char right here in the center, so I'm just going to pop it on maybe a little bit longer. So yeah, I saw a question or a comment about mutton. Mutton absolutely is the mature goat, whereas lamb is obviously the younger animal. Much more common in Canada, the United States, and Western Europe to see lamb than it is to see mutton. I'm not as familiar with other parts of the world, but much more common obviously to see lamb there. Mutton has, it does have a different flavor, and you can definitely use lamb. But if you did want to use mutton and you weren't able to find it, again, if you had an Indian grocery store in an area where there's an Indian butcher, you can usually ask them and they'll be able to guide you, or Pakistani or any South Asian country, they'd be able to tell you like, okay, you could probably get mutton here. And then also if you have any Lebanese butchers around you, they also use mutton quite a lot in those cuisines. So those could definitely be places that you would find mutton if it's not at a regular grocery store, which I'm from Vancouver, and I know that in Vancouver, it's right, you don't typically get mutton in like the regular grocery stores. I have to find sort of a butcher who's, you know, who does that specifically. So, all right. So you can go for as long as you want with these onions. If you like a very smoky, charred flavor in your food, you can like keep these on until they're completely black on the outside on one layer, you know, because obviously we're only cooking it face down, so the rest of it's not going to burn, but you can leave it on until it's totally black. Yes, so this mix that we did here was just the gram flour and the yogurt brought together. So just to recap for everyone where we are with the kadhi, we've only done 2 steps so far. So the first step is we've got our onions on an ungreased tawa or ungreased griddle. And what we're trying to do is blacken the face of the onion so that it's got some bit of charcoal on it that gives that really lovely flavor. And the other thing that we've done is we've whisked together the gram flour and the yogurt. And we've just whisked that together to make sort of this thick kind of gloopy paste that we're going to be able to put into our dish in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to now take these off. So if you can see, it's got sort of a nice char on it. Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and put those straight into the blender because we're going to make a nice sort of onion paste with them.
Could you remind us, what kind of pan are you using? Is that a grill pan?
Sure. Yeah, so this is sort of the kind of griddle that you would use for pancakes, or if you make rotis or dosas in your home, then that sort of pan would work too. Alternately, if you don't have a pan like this, just a regular frying pan is fine as well. A regular frying pan that's about 8 inches that you can use for the parathas too, that's totally fine too. So we're gonna need to give this like a minute to cool before we blend it. So I'm just gonna set it aside. That seems like a good spot. And while we do that, I'm gonna move on to searing our meat. So very similar to cooking a lot of meat. The sort of thought behind this is that we sear the meat off at a slightly higher heat, and then we add some more liquid to it and allow it to cook on a lower heat over a longer period of time, which makes it really, really tender. So that's very much what we're going to do here. So the great thing is that there's sort of 10 minutes of active cooking, and then you just set it aside. So I actually love to also do this in the Instant Pot, or if you have a crock pot, in a crock pot. It works really well in that, you spend sort of the 10 minutes up front just getting everything into the pot and watching it just for that time. Off it, seal it and off you go, and then it sort of cooks on its own. And it needs about 30 minutes of cooking at all, this dish, when it's just sort of bubbling away. But it's definitely better if you have a slightly longer time to cook it. As with all gravies, it just sort of matures, or soups, it just kind of matures as it cooks. So that's something that is just, it's a nice to have. It's not a necessary by any stretch of imagination. Okay, so I would grab our pot for the gravy, and I'm just going to turn the heat on to kind of, oh, it's not turning on. I'm just going to turn the heat on to like a medium heat. So you can see it's not quite as high as it was with the when I had the onions on, where I was sort of like on full heat. And I'm going to go ahead and add in the half cup of ghee. Now you're thinking, hey, that's a lot of fat, and it totally is. It just tastes better. So yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in and let that melt for 30 odd seconds. Get all of that in there. So ghee will go from this sort of yellow color to being transparent as it melts. And so what I'm waiting for in the pot, what I'm waiting for is for it to go completely transparent and liquid. If you can see a definite yellow color, actually, let me just show you what it looks like melting for those who maybe. So you can see where it's like a definite yellow color, that's still melting, and the rest of it has sort of melted into being transparent. So you want all of it to be transparent before adding anything into it. The first thing we're going to do actually is we're going to bloom our spices, or temper our spices. So spices respond really well to being cooked in a controlled fashion at a high heat. I'm just going to turn this down slightly while I talk. To being cooked in a controlled fashion at sort of a higher heat, that releases a ton of flavor from spices. So what we're going to do is we're going to add only our, we're only going to add 2 of the spices in right now. So we're going to add the cumin seeds. So add 2 spoons of cumin seeds. So just go ahead, and you can be liberal with this, just a little more for good measure, but about 2 spoons of cumin seeds, heap spoons. And we're going to just, those should start sort of sizzling right away. You don't want them, they can burn, so you don't want that. So what we want to do is heat up the oil, turn it down to something that's controllable for you, and then put it in, and they'll sort of bubble a little bit. But here, let me just show you again, actually. But it's not an aggressive bubble. It's just a very, very light bubbling, right? And that very light bubbling is really important for our next ingredient, which is the Asafoetida, or the hing, because this burns quite easily. So you really want this, you want to add this in when there's quite a bit of fat in the pan, which there is right now. And you also want to add it in after the cumin, because the cumin takes longer to cook. And you also want to add it in when your heat is reasonably low, but the oil or the ghee is already hot. So, so we need about 2/3 of a teaspoon of this. It's quite pungent, and if you have cooked with it before, then you'll know the smell. So in that goes, and we'll just give that a quick mix. And then I have a kilogram of mutton here. So if you're using mutton or lamb or beef or potatoes or whatever you're using, go ahead now and add that in. Give it a moment. So while that's cooking, we'll just leave it there. It'll take it down. It'll take a little bit. So one thing to know if you are cooking with mutton is that it can be, it's a meat that takes a little bit longer to cook. So it is much better to sear it off and then cook it at a low heat than it is to cook it continuously on a high heat. because then it'll just be really fibrous and not super pleasant. Okay, so while that's searing off, I'm gonna go ahead and come back to this guy, and I'm just gonna close this off. And I'm just gonna blend this into a paste. So as a quick reminder, here in the blender, we have the onions that we charred a little bit. We have our cloves of garlic, and we have a little bit of water. That's all we have in here. And we want to make this, into a paste. So I'm going to mute myself for just a second while I blend this, because it'll be really loud. And, but you can, if there's any questions, you can ask me and I'll be back in like 20 seconds.
I'm gonna take a quick look around, see how folks are doing. Any questions? All right, and just a reminder, we are recording, so if you do need to leave early, we'll have it sent around. Thanks for being here.
Okay, so now that this has had its time, you will see that this is now a sort of thick, chunky paste. No big whole pieces, but you don't need it to be entirely liquidy either. Yeah, so that's the paste. So now it's fairly quick. All we're gonna do is we're gonna turn up the heat on this for a minute. I'm gonna throw in my slit green chilies. I'm just literally gonna throw those right in, set that aside. The next thing I'm going to add into this is going to be the onion and garlic paste. So I'm just gonna first give my meat a little bit of a stir, and I will show you what the underside of the meat looks like on the camera so you can see. You should start to get this like quite a nice smell already, actually. So you can see this piece that I've just flipped over here. You can see it started to get sort of seared on one side, and that's exactly what we want. So now is the right time for us to go ahead and add in the rest of our stuff. So onion and garlic, in that goes. Use a spatula, get most of it out.
And we have a couple questions. Some folks are curious about what kind of blender do you like using, and are you using there?
I'm using a Bosch blender, a Bosch brand blender, and I actually only got it about a month ago because my other one sort of gave away, and I can highly recommend it.
Yeah,
great blender.
Great, definitely. And are you using a non-stick pot to cook?
I am using a non-stick pot. You can most definitely cook this in an iron or a cast iron pot as well, and that's totally fine. But I am using a non-stick pot. I'm actually using a stone pot, which is naturally non-stick. So yeah.
Okay, and then
you need something that has a heavy you need something that just has like a heavy bottom, and then you should be good to go. So I wouldn't suggest like a thinner Tefal kind of pan, because you need something where the bottom holds quite a bit of heat. So cast iron, clay, stone, a thicker non-stick pan, so on. Me too. Okay.
Cool. All right, and just one quick question, then we'll go back to others. But can you use a crock pot or a pressure cooker for this?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't suggest, well, you could. So if you're using a crock pot or a pressure cooker, the only thing that'll be different is the time afterwards. So if you're using a pressure cooker, start exactly as I'm starting now. And then once we get everything in, I'll mark the spot as I'm talking. You can then start pressure cooking it instead of slow cooking it. But if you're using a crock pot, at the same time that you would start pressure cooking it, if you're using a crock pot, you start slow cooking it. So you definitely can. I'm just going to use some water to clean out my blender and make sure I get all of that lovely onion and garlic. So the secret here really the charring of the onion. So that is a step that I would not skip, because that adds like an incredible depth of flavor to this dish. All right. So, and
Can I ask a question?
please.
Can I ask a question? Yes. I see that maybe I missed this, but you're using a kilogram of mutton,
Mhm.
and so when one goes to buy beef, you ask for sirloin or T-bone or something. What are you getting? How do you ask for the proper mutton?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. That's a really great question. Thank you for asking that question. So the way that you would ask for it is if you were going to the grocery store to buy it, I would buy a combination of shoulder and shank pieces for this curry, because those are pieces that you can buy as one-off. So if you're going to buy it yourself, then that's kind of what I would look for. Pardon me. If you are going to a butcher, I would say curry cut a kilogram of curry cut, and then they give you sort of an assortment of pieces that has enough bone and enough flesh and so on, and they kind of take care of that for you. So those are the two ways. So today, for example, I just asked for curry cut. And if there is a South Asian butcher somewhere in your vicinity, that's a fairly typical way for people to ask for it, because you know that in a curry or a biryani, for example, you want a variety of pieces. You don't want, all legs or all breasts or all thighs, or not breasts and goat, but all shoulder or all thigh. You kind of want a variety of pieces. So if you're buying it yourself, a combination of shoulder and shank. If you're going to get it butchered, then curry cut. Thanks for that question. It's a great question.
Excellent.
So
Thanks.
this is simmering away. So while this is happening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, so the two spices we haven't added in yet are the turmeric and the red chili, and then our salt. So I'm going to go ahead and add the turmeric in with the yogurt and the gram flour, as well as the red chili powder. So I'm putting in a sort of a heaped teaspoon, as you can see, but you can definitely play around with the quantities depending on your propensity for heat. I'm also going to go ahead and add some salt in. Like I said, this salt tends to run a little saltier, so I'm going to start with a cautious teaspoon and then go from there. And I'm just going to give this now a good mix. Actually, this is probably clearer. I'm just going to give this a good mix. So I've taken all the lumps out. I'm just mixing the spices in. And similar to when you are adding cream, so this isn't going to split, right? Because the gram flour helps the yogurt not to split. But to be on the safe side, what I would do is I would take a little bit of the liquid out of the pot, like just a couple of tablespoons worth, if you can get that. Okay, a little bit of liquid out of the pot and into the bowl, and just mix that liquid in to just bring it to, start to bring it to sort of the same temperature before we add it in. And so now all that needs to go in is this paste and some water. And if you guys just bear with me 1 second, I just need to refill my water. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put this paste in. So just to recap for everyone, what's in the paste is our 1 cup of yogurt, our 2 tablespoons of gram flour, a teaspoon or more of red chili, whatever chili you choose to use, half a teaspoon or a third of a teaspoon of turmeric powder, some salt to taste, and a little bit of the cooking liquid from the pot. And now I'm going to go ahead and just add that in to this. Get all of it nice in there. It's all flavor, so you want to get as much of it in and leave as cleanable as possible. So go ahead and get all of that into the pot, give it a good stir. And you hear the sizzling obviously stop immediately as this additional liquid sort of goes in. And then you're going to add about 500 ml of water to start. So this is 500 ml here. And so we're going to go ahead and add that in. And it is going to be fairly watery. It is going to be fairly watery, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like in a second. And that's okay, because you want two things. You want all of the meat to be submerged. So you don't want any pieces to be entirely above the liquid. If they're poking out here and there, that's fine. But you want all of the meat to be pretty much submerged in liquid. And then you also want the gram flour. It's going to soak up quite a bit of water as it cooks. So you want to leave enough of a buffer for that. So I'll just show you what that looks like. Okay. So can you guys see that okay? So you can see that it's like quite watery at the top. Hopefully you can see that it's very watery at the top. And then here's the meat in there. I'm just gonna push that in as far as possible. So a couple of bits here and there is fine, but it's quite watery, and it's about a centimeter above where most of the meat is sitting. So this is kind of what it looks like from the top. And now all we're gonna do, all we're gonna do now is just cover that and let that cook. So that's actually pretty much our meat done. Now we just have to let it cook and check it in a little while. I'm just gonna move it to a back burner so we can also get to our bread. Just gonna move it to the burner here at the back. And turn this. And I'm gonna bring this up. Any questions about the meat? That's actually the meat pretty much done. We're just gonna let it cook now. Like I said, it'll take I'll probably leave it cooking for quite a while, just to let that flavor kind of build up. And now it's on the stove and it's kind of good to go. So any questions from anyone before I move on to the bread while I just clear up here?
I'm just scrolling back up to see if we missed anything. Thank you so much for our helper putting in the ingredients. No, I think we're good.
Good. Okay, great. So now we're going to get to the dough. So we'll make one of the flatbreads together, but this dough should probably yield you like four pretty sizable pieces of bread. So let's bring our dough back. All right, so you can see here, this is our dough that's been resting. You can see it hasn't risen. It's not going to, that's not what we're looking for. So there's no rise in the dough, super soft. Can you guys see that? Can you guys see the sort of texture of the dough? It's like very soft, but not sticking to your fingers. And that's what you want. There's quite a lot of fat in it. We put 1/3 of a cup of ghee, if you remember. There's quite a lot of fat in it. So it shouldn't ideally be a very sticky dough, and it should be pretty easy to work with, pretty malleable. Yes, a combination of shank and shoulder, that's right. So you want to go ahead and split this into 4. So I'm just going to take 1/4 of this out for the one bread that we'll make together here. And we can set the rest of that dough aside. Okay, so now is kind of the little bit. So what laccha, the word L-A-C-C-H-A, laccha, what that word means is layered. That's kind of what it's implying. It's something that has a lot of body, something that has a lot of flakiness, a lot of layers. So what we need to do now is laminate our dough so that it has those layers. And what we're going to laminate it with is the flavor for the bread. So I've got my ghee in the microwave. Give me 10 seconds. I'm just going to melt it down so it's easy to brush.
And just a quick question, in terms of the cut of meat, for those who are doing the meat version, did you say a combination of shank and shoulder? What about thigh?
That's right. Yeah, if you can get reasonably sized thigh pieces, that's okay. But shank and shoulder is what I've used when I've kind of gone out and bought the cuts myself. Okay, so for the flavor, we're going to be using some ghee to laminate. And in that, we're going to add some red chili. Actually, I'm going to use the Cobanero chili for this. But like I said, just it's flavor-wise. I love this chili, but you can use any chili that you like. It just has a really nice smokiness to it. You can use Kashmiri chili, you can use Badgi chili, you can use paprika, any red chili that you like. If there's like a Mexican chili that you particularly like that's not terribly spicy, has a bit of smokiness to it, that would work great in this as well. And the other thing that has to go into this is garlic. So I've got some cloves of garlic here in my mortar and pestle, and I'm just gonna give them a nice little pound down, or you could mince it as well, both work. Okay, and I'm just gonna use this and get some of the garlic into it. So you want to mix this before you start rolling out the dough for two reasons. One, it's ready to go as soon as you need it. But secondly, it gives it a little bit of time for the flavors to come together before you sort of start using it. So just a quick recap of what's in here. It's just ghee, red chili, and garlic. And I'm just going to give that a little bit of a mix. So this is kind of what we have here. Yeah. So now that's ready to go. So while that's ready to go, I'm going to turn my heat on to heat up my pan. You're going to turn it on a pretty low heat. You're going to turn it on a pretty low heat. You just need the pan to start roasting the bread as soon as it's on. So it's on a low heat. It's just, I need it to be warm for when the bread comes on. As a side note, my curry is bubbling away quite a bit, so I'm just going to leave it for another minute or so, and then I'm going to turn the heat down to a simmer. Okay, so we have our dough, and we're just going to roll it out to about a 1/2 centimeter thickness. So you just want to roll it out. Here, the shape doesn't super matter. It's going to matter in a second, but I'm just going to roll it out. And you can see because of the all-purpose flour, it's quite stretchy, which is exactly kind of what we want. I'm actually going to do it straight on my camera because it's quite big. Okay. Just roll it out. Roll. The one thing you kind of want to be careful for, obviously, is that where you're doing the dough isn't too warm, which struck me just as I put it down next to where the heat is on. So just, roll your dough out where it's a bit cooler so it doesn't get super sticky. But you want to roll it out to a reasonable thinness. You should still be able to lift it all up in one piece, just as I suspected, sticky from the heat. Give me a moment. I'm gonna have to do this again, sorry. Shouldn't have done it so close to the stove. Make a slightly smaller one and do it on here. Okay, start again. So roll. Right on here. Now turn. Get it nice and thin. I love this bread, and hopefully once you've made it, you will too. It's just like a very luxurious bread to eat, and it's just absolutely delicious. Okay, so once you've got it to sort of a thinness, so about sort of 1/2 centimeter thin, what we're going to do is we're going to create the rolls for it. So we're going to take a pastry brush, just dip it in the ghee, and it should catch some, and just about enough of the chili and the garlic, but you don't want it to overpower. And then you're just going to sort of brush it all across, and I'll show you how much is on there before I start rolling this up. So you just want to brush it all across the dough, corner to corner, right across. So I'll just bring you guys over and show you what this looks like. But before I do that, I'm actually going to turn the heat down on my curry because it's bubbling away quite violently, which we don't need. Okay. So you can see this is the layer on here. So it's not, you can still see the dough through it, but it is all around the dough. Yeah. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to, try not to touch a hot pan. That way a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to start doing these folds. So hopefully you can see this. So I'm just starting on one edge. Just take all of it off the corner so none of it is stuck. Oh, my dough is very sticky today. So we're going to start with one corner. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in about a centimeter. Okay, so we're just folding it in about a centimeter. And then we're going to lift it and do another fold down on itself. So if I'm just going to bring the camera over so you can see the fold. Do you see that? So it's folded over itself. So we did one fold and then over itself. And so when you lift it, I can't do it with one hand, I'm sorry. When you lift it, you kind of create a double fold and then set it down. So you want to create a sort of folded, a multiple folded effect, right? So we're doing, like, if you imagine it, it's like one layer, another layer, another layer, another layer, and so on. So I'll just go ahead and do the rest of that. So again, lift and then create the fold and then drop and lift, create the fold and drop. And then you can start on the other side if it gets a bit heavy and make the meat in the middle. So lift, create the fold and drop. It's okay if your dough tears a little bit at this stage. I'll show you in a second. That mine has for sure. And this is what we want at the end. We want kind of like lots of layers. If they're torn right now, it's totally fine. And we're going to go ahead and just roll that into a pinwheel. So just roll it all the way around to create something that looks a bit like a bird's nest. Not super neat, doesn't need to be, that's kind of the charm of it. But yeah, this looks kind of like a bird's nest. And it should stick together fairly easily because of the fat. If it isn't, just go ahead and, like, use your finger, add a little bit. And now we're going to roll this out. And I'm just going to use a bit of flour to stop this sticking. So
You might want to tilt the camera away from the
sorry.
handle. Yeah, keep going.
Is that better?
That's much better.
That's better? Okay,
That's
thanks.
great.
So just go ahead and you can sprinkle it quite liberally with flour, and then we're just going to roll this out. And you should see your layers start to spread as you're rolling as well. And you want to take it to about a sort of 6-inch diameter before you get it on. Round is great if you can make it as round as possible, but shape is really not super relevant to the flavor, so don't worry too much about that. So here's the thickness that we have. It's not, as you can see, it's not as thin as like a crepe, but it's got a bit of body to it. And the layers are sort of within that there. So we're going to go ahead and just get that on our pan, and you can hear that sizzle right away because it's nice and hot. So we're going to let it cook, and the trick here is to let it roast on the pan until it's pretty much cooked on both sides, and then go ahead and we're going to brush it with some more of the ghee while it's on the pan before we take it off. So you want the ghee to just sort of fry it at the very end, but you don't want the ghee to be on it while it's roasting, because the pan is already hot. If we put the ghee on it while it's roasting, it's likely to cook from the outside and then remain a little bit raw on the inside. So because my pan has been on for a little while, my heat is quite low, and that's really ideal. So it takes a few minutes to cook, but you want to make sure obviously that there aren't any doughy bits on the inside. Are there any questions that I can take while we wait for the dough to cook?
Yes. Can I tell you why I'm confused? You made something really interesting with that ended up being a pinwheel. And that was really interesting, looks good. But I don't know, I thought you were going to make another one. Now you made something completely different. I thought you were going to make a second one, but now you ended up with a flat thing on the pan. So you were making two different types of breading?
No, so it's just the one bread. Thanks for the question. It's just one, it's that one piece of dough. And it's just, I rolled it out first and then I created the layers. And then basically once you laminate those layers and bring it together, even though I roll it out into a flat thing, it'll maintain those layers in the dough itself. So it's just the one. We're not marrying two pieces of dough. It's one piece of dough, and the amount of dough that we're making should give you between 4 and 5 of these. So does that answer your question?
So what you're having your pan right now, is that pinwheel thing that you flattened again?
Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
I didn't realize that. Oh,
Yeah,
Because that
absolutely.
pinwheel looked really interesting to be cooked, and you know that in that
Yeah, so
form,
that
it looked kind of tasty.
yeah. Yeah. So I just want to show you guys how it started to puff up, and I'm just going to flip it, and you can see it's getting nice and speckled on this side, and that's kind of exactly what we want. And what I would do is I would keep a plate or some sort of surface close to you, because once this comes out and it's hot is when you kind of need to like bunch it up a little to get those layers to start to separate, and you really want to do that while it's hot. You can do it while it's hot and then eat it when it's a bit cooler. It'll hold the layers, but you can't really separate the layers when it's cooler. So you kind of want to bunch it, scrunch it up. Scrunch is the right word, not bunch. You want to scrunch it up while it's still warm. So given that one side is sort of cooked and started to become a little speckled, I'm going to go ahead, take my pastry brush, dip it in the ghee again, and just brush the outside of this. Yeah. So let's brush it. It can be pretty liberal. It tastes quite a lot better with a bit more ghee on it. And then we're going to let the bottom side roast for a little while. Are there any other questions? I thought I saw one come up, but I couldn't read the whole thing before it disappeared.
Oh, can we freeze the, I'm gonna mispronounce, I'm having the bread, the dough for the bread. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I would freeze it is I would cook it first without the ghee. So because I'm making this essentially, you know, sort of consume now, I'm putting the ghee on. If you're going to freeze it, I would just do everything I did with the dough, laminate the dough, make the folds, make your pinwheel, flatten out your pinwheel, roll it out, and then just transfer it to a dry pan to roast, and then just dry roast it, cool it completely, and then freeze them. And then when you want to eat them, just heat your pan up and take them straight out of the freezer and put them on straight onto a hot pan, just as you would with like frozen bread. And then you can just brush it with ghee on the top at that time. So yeah, you can definitely freeze them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and flip this over again and ghee the other side. I think I saw a question about flipping over. So you definitely do flip it over. It's, yeah, so this is now the second flip. So now both sides are sort of have this nice sort of brown spots. And you can see with dough, you know, if there's any bits that have been left uncooked. And it's not so thick that we can't tell. So give this a nice little brush with ghee. So now both sides are cooked, and we're kind of finishing up the frying part of this. So now this has been turned just for a minute, one more on the other side. Now the reason we're flipping it is just to get that ghee in. You guys see that? And then I will show you how to scrunch it up in a second. It might be kind of hot, so you might want to use a kitchen towel unless you have super hands, which I don't. And then you can just do it with your bare hands, but it's not a level of skill I yet possess. So go ahead and press it down a little bit. You should be able to feel kind of a puffiness in the bread, and press it down. And I'm going to turn off the heat. One last flip, and off it comes. Yeah. So now as soon as it comes off, I'm just going to take the kitchen towels because it's going to be quite hot, and I'm literally going to go in and literally just scrunch it up. So I'm just scrunching it up to create those flaky layers. And what that does is, you guys see the layers in this now. You see the flakiness on it. So you have like these layers here.
Wow,
All
that's beautiful.
You can see the layers in the bread. Oh, there's a lot of steam on the bottom of this. So you can see the layers here on the bread, yeah? And so scrunching it up allows those layers to kind of come out immediately. And like I said, you do want to do this when it's hot. You can now leave this and put it into, you know, you can eat it in like whenever you want to eat it. But I would do the layers right away. So we have our, oh, I can just use this. We have our bread right there. Okay. Any final questions about the bread?
Say the name of the bread and the name of both dishes, please.
Sure. So the bread is this style of layered bread is called a Laccha Paratha. So that's Laccha, Laccha. And the gravy is called a mutton Kadhi, Kadhi, Kadhi.
Thank you. You're doing great
All
for
right.
6 in the morning.
Thank
I
you.
know, she deserves
Appreciate
a lot of applause.
that. I saw a question come in about the eating the bread hot. Yes, of course, ideally it should be eaten kind of straight off the pan. But often if you're, if you have to make 6 or 7 together, if you're going to do that in a sort of 30-minute wait, as long as you can keep it in a towel and warm, that's fine too. But just scrunch it up before you put it in the towel, and then you're good to go. You can't refrigerate the bread and eat it. I mean, you can, but you'd have to put it back on the pan to kind of revive it a little bit. It is bread that's kind of best eaten fresh off the heat. Okay, so we're gonna revisit our curry, which is bubbling away. Okay. Whew. So you should see it developing this like quite a nice thickness. Sorry, that sizzling is not from this. I just put the lid on the other hot pan, which is causing all of the sizzling. I'm just gonna turn this heat quite far down because it's very. Okay, so you should see, I'm just going to show you now the texture, and it's sort of reached texturally what I need it to reach. So here we are. Texturally, it's sort of reached what we need it to reach. So catching all the steam. Yeah. So this is kind of the texture. You can see that ghee kind of and the fat from the mutton sort of floating to the top, and the chilies are in there as well, just giving off that flavor, but not actually, too much heat. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm just going to do a quick taste test for salt. Yeah, I always wish I had smell through cameras. I think it's one of the only things that technology hasn't been able to solve for yet. So I'm just going to do a quick taste test. So we're good for salt. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The bread is eaten with the curry, so they're eaten together. I'm just going to cover this and let this cook. So cooking time. Sorry, I'm just going to answer that question in a second. Cooking time. This is now technically cooked, right? This is technically, it's not raw, it's cooked. But the flavor will get better and better and better the longer it cooks. So if you are using a pressure cooker and you pressure cook your meat to the point of being done, then that's kind of this stage where it's done. Now you do need it to slow cook. So we're going to leave this on here on a very low simmer now. Now you see it's not bubbling aggressively the way it was earlier. It's not bubbling aggressively the way that it was earlier. It's just kind of come down to like a lower sim. And keep the lid on, keep that steam inside. Very important that you keep the lid on while it's cooking. And we just take it down to a low sim. And now I'm gonna leave it on here for probably another 40 minutes before I turn the heat off. Once I turn the heat off, it's obviously ready to eat immediately if you wanted to. You can let it cool on the stove and heat it up when you're eating, that's fine too. You can also go ahead, once it comes to room temperature, you can pop it in the fridge and eat it the next day or the day after. It keeps really well for up to a week in the fridge. And actually, I think that the flavor of this curry is way better the second day, as it is with like a lot of meat dishes. Like the flavor of this is a lot better the following day. So you can have, or if you say you cook it like I'm cooking in the morning, so it has that 12 hours before dinner time to kind of develop its flavor. So cook it for, in total, an hour, 40 plus 30, an hour and 10 minutes on heat, 30 minutes kind of as we have done so far, like quite on a reasonably medium heat is sufficient. And then another 40 minutes on a low heat to make sure it's cooked. Your mutton should, or your meat should at that point be completely tender and just be at the stage of falling off the bone, which is kind of what you want for this. And if you're using potatoes, then they'll definitely be cooked by then. And for mushroom and jackfruit, it's not really an issue because they can take in a lot of heat and a lot of moisture, and so they cook really well over a long period of time too. Once you've cooked it for that amount of time, you just let it sit and cool. It's really important that it doesn't go in the fridge when it's hot. That tends to give it this kind of like sour flavor from the way that the ground flour and the yogurt will cool immediately. It's too much of a difference. So you want to go ahead and just let it cool to room temperature, and then either stick it in the fridge for the next day or the day after, or leave it on the stove till when you're ready to eat and just heat it up again. And to heat it up, definitely heat it with a lid on, bring it to a boil, and let that, and then that should work. I see lots of questions. I'm sorry, I haven't been able to catch all of them. Are there any particular ones you want to start with, Julia?
Yeah, no worries. Some comments as well as some questions. People are entertained by scrunch being an international word. And thanks for teaching us how they have done that in restaurants. We've always wondered. So can you eat this lovely bread with other dishes? Any recommendations?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's a delicious bread to eat kind of on its own. Actually, I'm going to tear off a piece now because it's nice and hot and smells really good, and I can show you guys what it looks like. So you can see here, you can see that flakiness in the bread. Yeah. So you can eat this with any other gravy, really any gravy. It goes really well. You can eat it with dal if if you have dal and you have that, it's great. If you want to have it on the side of soup as like an option for, a replacement for like a baguette or something, you can definitely have it on the side of soup. It holds liquid reasonably well because it's got quite a lot of dough in one piece, so it holds liquid quite well. So yeah, any gravy, a thick soup, a dal. If you wanted to use it to sort of scoop up a vegetable the way that you see, you can definitely have it with that. However you want, really. You could eat it with hummus. It's great with hummus as well. So it's just a good bread. Actually, if you want something like this for breakfast, it's great with like a little bit of cream cheese and like syrup. So it's really nice like that too. So yeah, lots of ways to eat this bread. And you can change the flavor. So if you remember, I put chili and garlic in here because that flavor complements what I'm eating really well, and it goes well with kind of savory food. But if you wanted to change the flavor, you could use plain fat. You could just use the ghee and use that. And so the bread itself doesn't impart any specific flavor.
Nice. Let's see. If you want to cook with or have a rice with this, do you recommend a certain kind of rice?
I suppose basmati rice would be the most common, but you could definitely experiment with that. You want a rice that will soak up a little bit, so soak up the gravy. So like a brown rice tends not to be as porous, and so it doesn't soak up gravy as much. But that's just a preference. If you prefer rice, then if you prefer brown rice, of course that works as well.
Great, and I think we'll take one or two more questions. But if folks like root vegetables, is that something they could add to the stew? If maybe a vegetarian option, or you could add it with the meat?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would avoid, I'm just thinking through root vegetables. I would avoid sweet potatoes. I would avoid beetroot. And the reason I would avoid, and carrots, and the reason I would avoid those three vegetables is because they have a lot of sweetness. And so they change the flavor of the stew quite a bit. Now, can you add it? Of course you can. I'm talking about trying to maintain as close a flavor profile to what I'm creating, right? So will it change the flavor a lot? Yes, absolutely. Could it still be delicious and you might enjoy it? For sure. Go ahead and experiment. Please do. Like that's kind of the best way to cook. But those will change the flavor. So if you're doing a vegetarian version, I would suggest choosing a vegetarian option that doesn't, that either has kind of a flavor like a portobello mushroom or a jackfruit, where it's almost sort of got that texture and meatiness to the flavor. Or I would suggest something that's like a potato, which is just a sponge and can take in any flavor that you put in there. Another vegetable that could work well in this is probably cauliflower for the same reason. But yeah, I instinctively don't think root vegetables or not, I think they might taste okay, but I think they'll change the flavor a lot and make it a little bit sweeter.
Good to know. I put sweet potatoes in everything, so I would have to think twice. Eggplant. Any thoughts on eggplant?
Eggplant's a great option, but if you were using eggplant, what I would do is I would sear the same way that we did with the onions. I would sear off the eggplant before it went in, just so that it doesn't become slimy and holds a bit of its shape while it cooks on the inside. So, and I would slice the eggplant, I wouldn't cube it. So slice the eggplant into like 1.5 centimeter slices, and then sear it off on a pan so that it's nice and sort of, you know, reasonably dark, as though it would have been on the grill. That level of doneness, and then put it into the curry and let the inside cook, just as we did with the meat, but you would just do it on a separate pan.
Got it. As a kind of wrap up, can you tell us a bit more about what you do with Third Culture Cooks? I know you spoke about it at the beginning, but if folks missed it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Third Culture Cooks, I do a number of things. So I do a lot of teaching, both, you know, cooking or cooking in this way, so sort of physically preparing dishes. But I also do a lot of teaching around the why of the way that we eat. So at the moment, for example, I'm teaching a food and politics course and looking at, like, you know, some of the food and politics of this region. I do food and history courses. I run supper clubs where I look at like a geopolitical conflict and how food changed because of that conflict as people moved. And so I do those kind of physical experiences. I also run a little program over on Patreon where I look at the Indian diaspora and basically trying to answer the question, like, how is it that you find some version of curry in so many countries in the world, and where does that come from, and how did the diaspora, you know, leave from the subcontinent or come to the subcontinent depending on the group of people. And so that's a little more in depth, and every month we take one population. So for example, the Indians in South Africa is a good example. You know, you take the population, you look at, okay, well, when did they come? How did they come? How did their food evolve? How did they come to have a unique cuisine, so on and so forth. So that's a little more, that's more of an intense program, monthly program that I run there. Yeah, I do various things on Instagram as well. So please do, that's really the best place to find out what's happening in my world. I tend to use that very, very heavily, as well as my website. So my website is just thirdculturecooks.com. I have a podcast called, I have a podcast called More Than Masala, where with my co-host, Chef Keith Saracen, we look at a different spice every month and try and get into the history of the spice and look at the story of it and how it's used and why it's used and all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, I'm actually going into recording the next episode of the podcast immediately after this. So
Wow.
spent a lot of time doing that.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm learning so much. I didn't realize you had a podcast. Love podcasts. Looks like our attendees are super excited to learn more. So I just also put your link tree, which links to a bunch of things.
Thank you.
So this is wonderful. Your website, your Instagram, your podcast. Amazing. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Can you do another lesson sometime right here for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
Oh
I'd love to see it. It's been really good, and if you appreciate the wonderful class today, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I love it. You have been an honorary sous chef. So thank you, Arthur.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I saw some applause, so definitely feel free to unmute and show your appreciation, add some comments into the chat to thank our incredible teacher, or use your favorite emoji reactions, hearts, party horns, the likes, whatever you'd like to share. So thank you so much. You know, one of the joys of Tradition Kitchens for me is not necessarily knowing somebody and getting to meet them and learn their stories through food. And that's what, you know, today has been for me and for all of us. So thank you so much. Even though we're worlds apart, the remote world brings us together. So we are super grateful to you for sharing your time and stories and delicious foods. So thank you. And to all of our class participants, thank you. We have a few classes coming up as we wrap up December. Next week, we're doing Thai food again with Ploy, which will be incredible. She sells out every class. We don't charge, so sell out in the sense of we can only have about 300 folks on Zoom. Then a few days later, we're doing our Cooking with a Cause class with Andy, who works at an agricultural institute that supports farmers, and we'll learn a lot about seafood stew and how he works closely with farmers markets. And then if any of you are interested in teaching, we would love to feature you. We're all volunteer led. So please do let me know at cookingwithtradition@gmail.com, or you can write us on Instagram. And we might have a very special class to wrap up December, live from Vietnam. I just got the best Instagram direct message yesterday. So we're going back and forth around how to make it possible and get a tour of a village and learn about authentic cooking. So look out for more creative classes coming your way. And I think that's it for our final announcements. We are writing a blog post summarizing the year. So if anyone wants to share a quote about how Tradition Kitchens has made an impact in your life, we would love to hear it. Look out for that link. And I'll turn it over to our teacher for any final words before we hang up.
Thank you so much. No, this has been so great, and it's been so lovely to interact with all of you. And please do, if you do make this dish sometime, please do feel free to send me either a direct message on Instagram or an email, and ask me any questions at all. And yeah, thanks so much once again. Thanks, Julia, for having me on.
I love it. Yes, please tag her, tag us. We'll like to share your delicious dish with everybody else. So. All right, I am going to stop recording, and if anyone wants to ask any questions off the record, feel free to do so. But thank you all. Have a great weekend. Have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever in the world you are joining us from. Bye-bye.